Hello scale modeling world, and welcome to part 6 of building the HK-140H scale B-17 series. In part 6, we're going to airbrush all the interior parts, give them a little bit of weathering in preparation for assembling the interior, and then putting together the fuselage, which will be in part 7. So, with that said, let's get started.
Before we get started, I got some emails from people wanting some close-up pictures of the finished engines. So here's the port side engines, and they came out pretty good. And here's the starboard side engines. And I probably should have done this in the last video, but I didn't think about it. So thanks to all of you who sent me these email requests. So now let's get started. I've got the placards installed on the interior of the fuselage, and they came out pretty good. The frame for the 50 caliber machine gun here didn't fit very well, so after I scraped the paint off, I used tiny drops of Testor's glue to help position it to give me some working time. And I finally got it positioned correctly, and then when it was dry, then I hit it with some super glue. So there's a little bit of a gap right there. Nothing much you can do about it. So yeah, these came out good. And on the other side, I did the same thing. There are two placards there and there, and again, this one didn't fit very well, this frame for the 50 caliber machine gun. So now I can at least start installing all of the other parts in place, and we'll see how it looks. But we're all done. I'm starting to put all the interior parts in place, and then we can close up the fuselage. I've got everything glued together on the rear part of the fuselage. Most of this you're not even going to see. I put this in place, and this cup assembly that I had made, scratch built, worked really, really well. So that's in place, and all I got to do is put the ball turret here, make sure that the positioning holes line up correctly. This deck was a little bit too long, and so there are two positioning pins here, and I carefully cut those off and then sanded this down a little bit and form fitted it into place. And then once I popped it in place, I hit it with some super glue on the underside. This piece back here, when you go to assemble these two ammo boxes, you gotta skew them in a little bit, otherwise they're not gonna fit inside the fuselage here. So you gotta angle them towards each other. And then this post for the twin 50s, I pushed it down too far and then glued it in place before I realized that if you do that, the guns won't line up correctly with their barrels. So what I did was I scraped some paint off of this post and glued them above their positioning points right there, and that worked out real well. So just be mindful of that. The problem is that the positioning pin is really, really flimsy. I just don't understand why they did that. But this kind of goes back to my argument of buildability. So I did that machine gun first and positioned it with some Testor's glue, and then slid the barrel in to make sure that the barrel would slide into the receiver group, and then did the same thing on this side. So that's how you do it. And there's supposed to be an armor plate shield here. It doesn't fit very well, so I just left it out. And again, they have all of these little details, and some of them just don't fit. And not only that, you're not going to see it once this is all closed up. So there you have it. Now on the front part of the fuselage, I'm still working on parts that go in place, and I think what I'll do is I'll position this bulkhead and glue it in place, and then that'll allow me to properly position the table, and then I can work on these pieces up here. But it's almost done. Almost done. So that, unfortunately, that fits in place and does not interfere with that by just a nets here, right up here. So, yeah, too many small interior parts that you're not going to see once the fuselage is closed up. So there you have it. So we're making some progress, and a few more parts on this side and on the starboard side, and we'll be able to then glue everything in place and glue up the fuselage. So it's coming along. I've got the Bombay bulkheads and the top and this frame glued together, but how I did it was I positioned everything inside the fuselage, first this bulkhead, then this deck, and then I kind of worked my way back. It took about 10 minutes to get everything positioned correctly, and then what I did was I had to kind of push down a little bit to make sure that these bulkheads were correctly seated in the grooves on this side of the fuselage. And then I glued this frame in place first, then I glued the top, and then this side. And this side had a tendency to pop a little bit that way, so I put a tiny drop of super glue here and then held it together until it dried with my fingers, just like this. Now, with that said, there's still a little bit of play here. You can see that, how that moves. So when I go to actually glue this in place, I'll put a little bit of super glue right there, and that'll fix that problem. So what you're going to have to do is, once you position this, is go ahead and run a bead of, let me get my pointer here, run a medium set bead along here and along here on this side, and that'll hold it in place. And then you can go ahead and put a drop here and some right there. But what I've got this together, so let me go ahead and carefully pull this apart and show you what I'm talking about. So now, and the reason why I did this, the instructions tell you to assemble this outside of the fuselage, but if you do that and there's just the slightest skew this way or this way, it's not going to fit inside these grooves, and it's not going to fit here or here. So that's why it was important to do it the way I did it. So now it fits right in place. So now I can go ahead and put the framing here and on the other side and glue that in place, and put a few drops of super glue there to make it nice and strong, and then I can put these plates on the ends after I put these bombs in place. The other thing is, you got to drill out these bombs a little bit, the positioning holes, because they're a little small. And the other thing I did was I scraped the paint off of these positioning pins, and also across the back here where it sits against the frame and at the top. So, but if you do it the way the instructions tell you to do it, it's not going to go together right. And when you go to put it inside the fuselage, you're going to be really upset. So it's best to do it the way I did it, which is to position everything inside the fuselage and then carefully start super gluing everything together. So now I can go ahead and scrape some paint away and then super glue these in place, so that I can then put the bombs on here and then the outside pieces. So yeah, that's how you do it. I've got the racks and the bombs in place, and came out pretty good. So how I do it was on the back side of this frame, I put some slow set, positioned it, and then held it like this, and then hit some medium set drops right here. And once that was dry, then I hit some glue, some medium set, just tiny drops at the roof areas where the frame connected to the roof. And then I glued the bombs in place with slow set super glue one at a time. So now all I have left is these sides to put in place, which I'll do, and then I'll show you how it looks. But yeah, so far so good. I've got all of the Eduard colored placards installed and Eduard seatbelts. It came out pretty good. And I also cleaned the tabs here so that glue will stick on the bottoms. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you stand a chance of these seats popping out on you after you've closed up the fuselage. So this is the pilot and co-pilot seat. The radio operator's seat has a seat belt, although you're not going to see it. The bombardier and navigator both have seat belts, and they came out nice. All of these are Eduard pre-painted seat belts. The bombardier station, there's 4 Eduard placards here. Here's the back bulkhead to the cockpit. And here is the right side of the cockpit, and the masking I did for the large oxygen canisters came out pretty good. Had to do a little bit of touch up around the edges, but came out pretty good. And you're not going to see much through the canopy glass. And here's the other side. Came out pretty good. I really like these Eduard pre-painted placards. They really enhance the interior. And here's the navigator's table with a writing tablet. And, oops, I'll put this like that. Here's the rear bulkhead for the forward area of the fuselage, where the navigator and the bombardier are, and that came out pretty good. And here's the other side, and here's the cockpit floor. And I haven't put the control levers for the engines on yet. I got to paint them, but what's important is, you can see it, there's a little bit of distance here between the plastic part and the placard, so that I can put drops of Elmer's white glue in there and install the levers, and they'll sit correctly. So yeah, came out pretty good. And when you put this onto this, see if I can get it in there, it looks like that, which is really nice. Now, there was a little bit of interference in this area right here on this forward area, and how I fixed it was I sanded down a little bit here, and I sanded down a little bit here to get rid of that interference problem. And of course, once it's all put together, get this in here like that, you're not going to see it. So yeah, it's going to look pretty good. So that's all of the Eduard placards and all the enhancements, basically for the forward part of the fuselage, and of course the cockpit area. I've got the Bombay all assembled, and it came out pretty good. What's important is that these parts fit inside the fuselage nicely because of the way I assembled it. And I checked the fit on both sides of the fuselage with this in place, and the fuselage closed up and closes up nicely. So this part's ready. The cockpit is done, and it came out pretty good. And it fits inside the fuselage quite nicely. And there's the levers. Did it with white glue, and they turned out okay. Not perfect, but not bad. The bulkhead that separates the radio room from the aft part of the fuselage, I checked the fit, and it came out pretty good. Now the decking that attaches here and here, what I did was I cut the positioning pins off, and this will allow me to, once this is glued into place, I can literally slide this piece into place because there's a little protrusion here so that it'll slide right like this, just like this. Now, one note is I had to cut off some of the bottom of that because it was too long and it was causing the deck to do this. So with this cut off, it fit perfectly. So let me get these out of the way. Now, this side of the fuselage, that came out pretty good. Now, the bulkhead here for the cockpit, when I closed up the fuselage, it prevented the fuselage from closing up down here. So I tried sanding down here and here. That didn't solve the problem. And finally, I cut off the bottom here, which you're not going to see anyway. And when I cut, there you go, you can see it better there. When I cut the bottom off, that's what did it. So somehow it was too wide down in this area, and now the fuselage closes up real well. So next step is to just start gluing everything in place, and it's looking pretty good. Not going to see this stuff. Once the glass is in place, you're really not going to see anything in here. So yeah, looking pretty good. Quite busy in here. And here's the other side of the fuselage. Looking pretty good. So I'm glad I put these longer pins on the bottom of these machine gun pedestals because it helps set them in place really, really well. And so now we're ready to start gluing things into place.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching part 6, and in part 7 we're going to concentrate our efforts on assembling the interior and then gluing together the fuselage. So with that said, have a great evening. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give us a great thumbs up, and if you get the chance, visit our website at www.mikeshe.com. Have a great evening and happy scale modeling.